Donald Trump is not man enough to accept the fact that he lost 6 years ago. So what does he now have in store for us? Let's bring in our panel, starting with CNN's fact-checking machine, Daniel Dale. Daniel, we don't know exactly what Trump's going to say in his Thursday speech, but lately he seems to have been laying the groundwork for a rehashing of the 2020 election, which, again, he lost.
Which he lost, and yet, as you said, we're approaching 6 years of him lying that he won. Recently, he's begun saying that so much proof has already emerged of his claims that the election was rigged and that he was the real winner. No such proof has emerged. He's even started saying that he is in his third term as president, so inventing an imaginary and unconstitutional victory. And then there's an entire a cinematic universe, dozens of additional lies, frankly, too many to go through, claims that he won the popular vote in all three of his presidential elections. In fact, he only won it in 2024. Wild conspiracies about China, Italy, other countries using voting machines to flip votes simply did not happen. And then other claims about mail-in ballots. You heard one there that they're crooked, they're corrupt. They simply are not, although the fraud rates are slightly elevated compared to in-person voting, and mail-in ballots have been good enough for legitimate voters, including one Donald J. Trump, who's voted by mail himself. He's also claimed recently that the U.S. is the only country that continues to use mail-in ballots. Again, simply not true. Dozens of countries continue to do so, and they include, Jake, major democracies like Canada, the U.K., Germany, Australia, and Switzerland.
Yeah, and we should note, obviously, that Republicans control the House and the Senate and the White House. But Trump has been focusing a lot about California elections, where Democrats have been more successful. Tell us more about that.
He's been lying about California elections since 2016, so even before his 2020 lies began. Claims that he would have won California all three times if California had Jesus Christ as the vote counter, an honest vote counter. California's votes are counted honestly and accurately, though famously slowly, and the honest, accurate results show that he lost by millions of votes each time. He's claimed that California does not even give voters the option of voting in person. In fact, each and every California voter does have that option, although they're also sent a mail-in ballot. And then recently, he's begun spreading a wild, just blatantly false conspiracy theories about California's recent primaries. So listen to something he said this week.
When I look at how rigged our elections are, look at Spencer Pratt. Spencer Pratt was an easy number two and maybe number one, but certainly number two. And all of a sudden, they had the mail-in ballots pour in, and Spencer Pratt was gone. That was in Los Angeles. Spencer Pratt was gone. And that was easy. And who beat him in no name, who was all of a sudden, so great that she got practically 100% of the votes from the mail-in ballots.
Nothing weird happened. Nothing shady happened. All that happened in the LA mayoral election was that legitimate votes were legitimately counted. They showed that Spencer Pratt did not qualify for the top two placing needed to make the runoff. In the gubernatorial race, conversely, legitimate votes were legitimately counted. They did show that a Republican candidate, Steve Hilton, made the runoff. President Trump has claimed that he is responsible for stopping some sort of rigging in progress in that gubernatorial race. Simply did not happen. And notably, Jake, even Hilton himself has never endorsed those Trump claims about his own race at all.
Let's bring in Jeff Duncan, who was Georgia's Republican lieutenant governor during the 2020 election, recently ran for office as a Democrat. Jeff, Democratic Senator Jon Ossoff of Georgia, he is running for re-election. He's reacting to this unverified report from a Republican operative who is now pretending to be a reporter. It claims that Trump plans to declare both Ossoff and Senator Raphael Warnock illegitimate because of election fraud. We don't know if that's actually what Trump's going to say. We have no idea what Trump's going to say. But take a listen as to what Senator Ossoff said about this claim to CNN's Manu Raju.
He calls Georgia's senators illegitimate. He is calling Georgia's voters illegitimate. He fears defeat in the midterms, and that explains his spiral into conspiracy theories that put Georgia Republicans in a terrible bind.
Regardless of whether Trump plans to say this, it's interesting, Jeff, that Ossoff is jumping on this. Because it's not good for his opponent. It's not good for Congressman Mike Collins to bring this issue back because it insults Georgians.
Yeah, I can assure you most Republicans, especially those that are on the ballot, not only in Georgia but across the country, do not want Donald Trump rehashing the 2020 election. He's had 6+ years to produce some facts or some information that actually leads a normal-brained person to see it as rigged. But look, since the early hours after that 2020 election, Donald Trump and his disciples have been trying to create solutions in search of a problem. But the reality is, and I think we're going to watch this play out Thursday night in his speech, his facts are always a mile wide and an inch deep. When you're selling snake oil every minute of every day, then you've got to continue to play out the narrative and continue to lie. I think there's a tug of war going on inside the administration. I think you got some of them wanting to create a shiny object to get them away from the obvious downtrodden issues around the war. But you also have the pride police inside the White House that are trying to make sure they protect his pride and never have to make him say, sorry, I got that wrong. I think there's a battle. And ultimately, we're going to watch this play out. But once again, the facts show there was nothing rigged, whether you wanted hand counts, recounts, certifications. And ironically enough, last thing here, it's only the elections that Donald Trump loses or the people that he supports loses that he says that there's fraud. We've been using the same machines, the same process, and I would assume a majority of the same poll workers for years in Georgia in elections that he's won and lost.
Yeah. Alyssa Farah-Griffin, you're the former Trump White House communications director. Do you think Trump's Thursday address is going to introduce some wild new claim, new action? We saw in the Maggie Haberman, Jonathan Swan book that there was talk of Nicolas Maduro saying, hey, I'll give you some evidence, quote unquote evidence, of hacking of the 2020 election. What are you expecting?
It could go one of two ways, Jake. Listen, there's a world in which this is just rehashing the greatest hits, I'll call it, of the election was stolen, it was rigged, mail-in ballots are fraudulent, things he's repeated many times. But what I'm going to be curious to see is what new information he may introduce into this. The Maduro factor is fascinating. I saw that reporting too. Obviously now Maduro's in American custody and is incentivized to say and do whatever he can to ingratiate himself to this administration. It's also at a moment where we have a new director of national intelligence, Bill Pulte, who's been put into the role, somebody with very, very scant resume for that kind of a significant intelligence role. So is there something that materializes from his corner of the Trump universe? That's what I'll be watching for. Also, are there any policy announcements? Donald Trump has often, when he can't get things through Congress, tries to really push the limits of what you can do through an executive order. So he's been harping on this SAVE Act. Is there something from the Save America Act that he tries to do through an EO and announces that? That's another thing I'll be watching for. But again, he will not focus on the election he won. He was elected in 2024, bring down costs, deal with the border crisis, deal with migration. Instead, he wants to retread the election 6 years ago that he didn't win. It boggles the mind heading into the midterms.
David Becker, the executive director and founder of the Center for Election Innovation and Research. What are you going to be listening for in Trump's speech Thursday night?
Well, as you pointed out at the beginning, it's been 6 years, almost 6 years since that election. Since that time, dozens and dozens of courts have looked for evidence of fraud, have found nothing. There have been defamation cases that totaled $1 billion in claims against those who lied about the election, who did not put any evidence forward. And now we're 18 months into this administration. We're through one attorney general, one secretary of DHS, and one director of national intelligence. And during that 18 months, they have found nothing, despite turning over every rock, looking for evidence of election fraud, looking for evidence of a crime that was never committed. And so I think what we're expecting is to hear some rehashed claims about election fraud, perhaps about machine vulnerability, even though those machines are tested, they're not connected to the internet. Everyone votes on paper in the United States, and that paper is recounted and audited to make sure that the machines counted correctly. I think what I'm really expecting is perhaps the same reaction I had when the Fulton County warrant was served.